unpredictable, and that's little comfort to a chancellor whose budget is operating on such small margins.
Gurpreet Narwan there for us. As you can see, the Foreign Secretary has joined me. Lots to discuss with him. Good morning, Foreign Secretary.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. Wanted to start on a story that a transport plane from the US landed overnight at RAF Lakenheath, reportedly meaning that US nukes are stationed on British soil now for the first time in 20 years. Can you confirm that?
It would be wholly inappropriate for any Foreign Secretary to comment on our nuclear capability and how we work with partners to keep our people safe and Europe.
Meaning that US nukes are stationed on British soil now for the first time in 20 years. Can you confirm that?
It would be wholly inappropriate for any Foreign Secretary to comment on our nuclear capability and how we work with partners to keep our people safe and Europe safe. And so I'm afraid I can't go into operational details on that issue, but I would want the public to recognise that we have had a nuclear deterrent for generations. We take that seriously, the upgrading of that nuclear deterrent, and we work with partners to ensure that we can keep our people and Europe safe.
Very, very interesting, and understand the reticence to give us more on that. Let's talk about the situation in Gaza. You're a signatory and author of a letter that you talked about at length in Parliament yesterday. Just to get to the crux of it, do you think genocide might have been committed?
Well, I made the assessment way back in September that I believe that there was a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law. I have the practitioner's book in my office of all the laws that could be breached. There are things like proportionality. There are things like deconfliction, so that aid workers and journalists are not killed despite conflict going on. And of course, it is important not to use food as a weapon of war. I made the assessment that there was a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law, and for that reason we suspended arms sales that could be used in Gaza. I recognise the debates that are going on. In the end, it will be for the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to make a determination on the substance of what is being said. But my responsibility is to ensure that the British government, and as a consequence our public, are not complicit in anything that could be a breach of international humanitarian law, and that's for that reason we're not sending arms to Israel that could be used in Gaza.
I'm interested that you make such an explicit conclusion and refer to September, because as I understood in September you suspended 30 out of around 350 arms exports licence that Israel has. Are you saying you're suspending all of them now?
We have a very robust exports licence.
30 out of around 350 arms exports licence that Israel has. Are you saying you're suspending all of them now?
We have a very robust exports licensing regime. I am satisfied that we are not sending arms that could be used in Gaza, but we do send other things. For example, kit and equipment that is used by NGOs or journalists. We've not suspended that. I don't think anyone expects us to. We might send, or there might be a request to buy certain chemicals or medicines that are used.
But those don't require arms.
Those are not arms. But they are export licences, and that might be the number that you're referring to.
So my numbers essentially are irrelevant, which I'm sure you're right on. Any possible export licence that relates to a weapon has been suspended. And that took place back in September?
That took place back in September.
So it's almost like we sort of underreported that back at the time. Just to come back to however you'd frame the scale of what's going on, and I know you don't want to prejudge something that might be one day a legal proceeding. We played this clip earlier. You said it was such great passion in Parliament. The Israeli government must answer, what possible military justification can there be for strikes that have killed desperate, starving children? You went on to use the phrase, there's been a litany of horrors. What will they do to hold those responsible to account? If you don't get answers from the Israelis to those questions in the next week or so, will it change where you are on the spectrum of wondering if war crimes have been committed?
Let's be clear. I have already made a determination that there is a clear risk. It will be for courts to make a determination. For that reason, I have sanctioned Israeli ministers. I have broken off any discussion of a further free trade agreement with Israel. I sanctioned some of those egregious and settler violence a few months back as well. We restored funding to UNRWA when we came in, and we talked about arms sales. We will consider other acts with partners in the coming weeks if we do not see the ceasefire that we want to see. But it is my judgment that after the Knesset rises on the 28th of July, we are likely to see an acceleration to that ceasefire. And so I hope and pray that there will be a ceasefire in August. And in the end, it's that ceasefire that will allow for the aid to flood back in, as we saw last time, and importantly, for the hostages that are still being kept to be released. Let us remember 83% of the Israeli public want a ceasefire because they want to see the hostages released as well.
In terms of your considering further steps, is one of them recognising Palestine as a state, something you called for when you were in opposition, hasn't happened yet. It's almost as if that shouldn't necessarily be linked to this issue, but is it something you're close to doing?
Well, we said that we want to recognise at the appropriate time, and that is largely linked to a process, a tangible process that leads to the two states that we believe. Your viewers will have heard about a conference that the French and the Saudi Arabians have called, and we are participating in. That is principally to look at two states. It's principally to look at the governance and how we can get to a better day after and sustain that ceasefire and keep that two states alive. But yes, there's a live debate about recognition, when we should recognise, how we should recognise. Our position has always been that we want that to actually lead to two states, not just to be an act of symbolism. But I recognise that things are changing on the ground. And for example, this plan, this E1 plan that the last government said would lead to recognition, if that is rebirthed, that would be a horrendous act that would completely breach the possibility of two states.
I just want to roll back to your prior answer, because I think you listed in terms of potential further actions, I think you said a blanket weapons ban. Earlier in our interview, you suggested, in fact, that's already in place. Can you just clarify exactly?
No, I didn't list a blanket weapons ban.
You didn't?
No.
So that is essentially already in place? On our interview, you suggested, in fact, that's already in place. Can you just clarify exactly?
No, I didn't list a blanket weapons ban.
You didn't?
No.
So that is essentially already in place? Our interview, you suggested, in fact, that's already in place. Can you just clarify exactly?
No, I didn't list a blanket weapons ban.
You didn't?
No.
So that is essentially already in place?
On this time, we are not sending weapons that could be used for use in Gaza. There is an exception, and that is for the F-35 supply pool, common supply pool across the global community. So there is no blanket arms embargo, because for that reason, we don't want to bring down planes that are used to keep British people safe and Europeans safe and others who have the F-35. So that is an exception on this occasion, which means that there is not a blanket arms embargo against Israel, but there is in terms of direct sales that could be used in Israel of any arms or weapons, and indeed any F-35s that are sold directly to Israel. But we are not, in terms of the global supply pool and the kit that we put into that global supply pool for F-35s.
So I guess there's just a bit of a gap there between suggesting there's absolutely no weapons sales to Israel that could be used in Gaza and the fact that there are still some weapons sales to Israel.
Well, let's get this in context. The United Kingdom represents 1% of arms that are used by the IDF, 1%. Of that 1%, we have banned all sales of arms that could be used in Gaza. And we have banned any direct sales within the F-35 that could be used in Gaza. But there is a carve-out. It's a small carve-out, and it relates to our supply chain into the F-35. We cannot guarantee that there are not parts in the global pool that we buy into that could be used in Gaza. That is the exception. It's a small exception. But I think your listeners will understand, when there are other theatres of conflict, particularly here in Europe, that it is important that we don't bring down the whole of the F-35 arsenal across the world. And that is the only exception.
It's really, I really am fascinated by this detail, Foreign Secretary, which I don't think we'd got before. Just to kind of, I don't want to labour the point, but your words are so strikingly powerful and significant on this topic. And I guess you, excuse me, acknowledge as well that we're only affecting 1% of sales anyway. So it's almost like it's only a symbolic action to start with. Why not go the whole way?
I think it's more than a symbolic action, actually.
Well, it hasn't changed their behaviour.
No, but it's an act that ensures, principally...
Why not go the whole way?
I think it's more than a symbolic action, actually.
Well, it hasn't changed their behaviour.
No, but it's an act that ensures, principally, that we are not complicit as a country in anything that we assess could be a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law. And so it is more serious than just an act for the sake of acting. It's a decision I take as Foreign Secretary in a quasi-judicial manner, and it's one that I take very soberly and very seriously. And I would say that since we came to office, we restored funding to UNRWA. The last government wasn't doing that. We suspended the arms sales, as I've described. We've taken action on sanctions. We've taken actions on a free trade agreement. We've corralled the international community, as I did again yesterday, with 28 countries supporting that statement on humanitarian aid and what we are seeing happening, particularly to children in Gaza. And we will continue to act. But principally, the number one thing is to see a ceasefire, and to see that ceasefire, to get hostages out, to get and surge the aid in and bring this horrendous conflict to a permanent end.
It's interesting, though, that it's sort of almost to absolve ourselves as opposed to have an effect in terms of the actions, which I think was implied by that answer. I need to move on and just quickly ask about the response from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, who said all statements and all claims should be directed at the only party responsible for the lack of a deal, the lack of release of hostages and a ceasefire, Hamas, which started this war and is prolonging it. They go on to say Hamas is busy running a campaign to spread lies about Israel, and they're deliberately acting to increase friction and harm to civilians who come to receive humanitarian aid. I guess a two-part question to that. Do they have a point? And are you uncomfortable with the scale of rhetoric that you felt necessary and actions that you felt necessary to take towards our ally Israel? They're still our friend and ally?
I said in terms in Parliament that, yes, Hamas is exploiting the chaos that they see in Gaza, no doubt about it. And we know that Hamas has used people as human shields in the past, and Hamas are still keeping captive many hostages, and those hostages should be released. So let's be absolutely clear. The British government has no truck with Hamas and their behaviours. But it is right to say also that Israel controls what goes in and what comes out. It controls the Gaza Strip, and it has got people now in 15%, over 2 million people in 15% of the Gaza Strip. That's higher density than anywhere else on the planet. And the circumstances of that captivity are the grimmest on the planet. And it's for that reason that the international community is speaking out. I will continue to speak out. I will continue to act. I spoke to the Israeli foreign minister yesterday. I urged him to step back, to think again, to end this strategy that's not working, that we warned them would not work in terms of the reduction of aid, particularly, and the trucks that are piled up on the borders. That is my responsibility as Foreign Secretary, to work with others, to urge a change in behaviour, and we will continue to do that.
Foreign Secretary, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great to see you as always. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, there. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the build-up to the Lionesses semi-final.